welcome to the Human Flourishing Project. I'm your host, Alex Epstein. Today's episode is dedicated to one of my productive role models, Jerry Seinfeld. And the reason is because his interviews that I've watched, with him being interviewed by various people, have been my number one source of insight about today's topic, which is rejuvenation. But before I get to that, a little background on the show for those of you listening for the first time. The problem this show is trying to address, and this is the problem that most bothers me in the world and most fascinates me in the world, is that human beings lack reliable access to the knowledge we need to flourish. By flourish, I mean succeed in an integrated way, succeed materially, succeed mentally, succeed across the board to our full potential as human beings. And to succeed and to flourish, we need knowledge. And it's really, really hard to get the knowledge about what actually causes human flourishing, and therefore it's hard for us to know what to do. And one of my basic premises on this program is that the key to getting the knowledge we need, whether it's about psychology or nutrition, relationships, politics, whatever, is that we need to improve what I call our knowledge systems. We need better systems for acquiring knowledge, for applying knowledge, for explaining knowledge. If we just keep looking for new sources of knowledge or new claims to knowledge, then we're just going to keep getting drowned in an ocean of non-knowledge, which is what most of the claims to knowledge are. So today I want to share with you my experience seeking real knowledge of a crucial aspect of human flourishing, which is rejuvenation. So first, quick definition of rejuvenation. Rejuvenation is, quote, to restore to a former state or to make fresh or new again. To restore to a former state or to make fresh or new again. So I'll go into more depth in a little bit, but the idea in human flourishing is that clearly creation is part of human flourishing. To flourish, we need to use our minds to bring new value into the world. If people in our society don't do that, we die. And if we don't do that, we can't support ourselves, and we're also missing out on a huge part of what's possible to us mentally in terms of engaging our minds. But when we create, we can cause a whole bunch of problems. We can deplete our energy physically, we can deplete our energy mentally, we can take on stress. And so it's very, very important to figure out how to not only create, but to rejuvenate, to restore ourselves to the optimal state of creation, among other things. But that's that. I'm going to focus today really on rejuvenation for purposes of creation. How do we restore ourselves after the creative process or even during it so that we feel really good, so that we're high energy, so that we can enjoy the creative process more, so we can do it for a longer amount of time? This is what rejuvenation is all about. And I've been studying rejuvenation intensely for about 4 years, and it begins with Seinfeld. In 2014, I was watching some Seinfeld videos on YouTube, which I do. I like to watch basically every place where he's been interviewed. And I saw a speech by him in which he extravagantly praised something called transcendental meditation. Transcendental meditation, or TM. I think the website is tm.org. And what intrigued me about it was he said that this practice of meditating a certain way for 20 minutes a day, twice a day, had made it possible for him to do something that I regard as truly amazing in terms of his show Seinfeld. Now, the show is my favorite show ever, and it's an amazing show, so that in and of itself amazes me. But for the first 7 years of the show, he had this collaborator, Larry David, who is just such an amazing creative force himself. He's just this creative genius. And even if you don't like his style, say on his show Curb Your Enthusiasm, you can see that this person had an amazing formative effect on the show Seinfeld, and he was the head writer, and he was heavily involved in putting together all the episodes and editing them. And Jerry was involved in some of that too, but he was also acting. And then in the last 2 seasons, he was not only acting and being involved like he was with Larry David, but once Larry David left, he had to run the whole show. So he had to be really involved in the writing and editing. He had to act. He had to deal with business aspects. And you're talking about something like 22, 23 shows a season. And this is iconic television. And he somehow was able to do this. And in the speech, he said that the biggest thing that enabled him to do this was transcendental meditation. Because I don't think he used the term rejuvenation, but the key idea was it rejuvenated him. It rejuvenated him to the point where he had multiple hours of extra energy a day. So where he would otherwise be collapsing at 2 or 3 p.m., he could go throughout the day. And this would probably normally intrigue me, but in 2014, I really, really needed extra energy because I was working on the most difficult project of my life, which was my book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, which I had gotten a very exciting contract with Penguin to write, but I was given 5 months to write it. And I was already running my business, the Center for Industrial Progress. I was doing speaking. I was running the business side of it in terms of marketing and sales. And I just felt like I don't have the time and energy to write this book at the level that I want to write it. And that was a very scary prospect. But I would just go through the day, and at a certain point, I would not feel like new. I was not rejuvenated. And in my experience with writing, above all things, it is incredibly valuable to be rejuvenated. So I heard this from Seinfeld that this one thing had been crucial to him. So more or less, as soon as I saw this video, I looked up, okay, how do I learn transcendental meditation? And I decided, even though it was $1,500, which is a non-trivial amount of money, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna spend this right now, or as soon as I can, to start taking a class, because you have to pay $1,500 or so, or at least you did at the time, to take the class. And so I a couple weeks later, I started taking the class, and I really wanted to know, is this working? So I started tracking, hey, how do I feel after this? And in particular, what's my energy like? And I knew there might be some kind of placebo effect. So I tracked it over time. And I noticed that, wow, I consistently have more energy. And with this meditation, I have a rejuvenation process that can really give me energy on demand. And this was exciting, but this isn't a show today about meditation. It's a show about rejuvenation as such. But the lesson that I got with Seinfeld and meditation was twofold. And when I say the lesson, when I was thinking about it earlier today, I thought this may seem obvious, but I definitely wasn't doing this, and I don't think most people do this. So lesson 1 was deliberately seek knowledge about rejuvenation. That's really important. Deliberately seek knowledge about rejuvenation in particular. I think we're not really taught to do that very often. And then number 2 was, when seeking knowledge, experiment on myself and track the results. So 1 is deliberately seek knowledge about rejuvenation, and 2 is experiment on myself and track the results. So I want to elaborate on both of those. So first, we need to deliberately seek knowledge about rejuvenation. When I look back pre-2014, I would think a lot in terms of relaxation or fun or rest, but I didn't use a lot this concept of rejuvenation. And I find it to be a very, very clarifying concept and a very valuable thing to focus on, because as an activity, it's clearly essential to flourishing. As I mentioned earlier, we definitely need to create to flourish. And thus, we need, because creation has certain costs, takes certain physical and mental resources, and can have certain negative byproducts like stress or just too much on your mind. It's really important to be able to figure out how to rejuvenate. And once I started getting into rejuvenation, the question was, okay, how do I get real knowledge about this? And not real knowledge just about, hey, what are any legitimate studies that have been done, but what's actually going to work for me. And the second element I'll talk about is testing. But the first element, before we can start to test, I think there's a step that comes before that, which is that we need to identify more specifically what we're looking for in rejuvenation. And I think of this as identifying standards of rejuvenation. Now, if you've been listening to the show for its entirety, in week 2, where I talked about knowledge acquisition systems, I talked about it's really important to have good processes for seeking out knowledge, for validating it, and for integrating it. And I talked about with seeking knowledge, how it's really important to be seeking knowledge about human flourishing in particular. And so in any given issue, a really good question is, what exactly does human flourishing mean in this situation? So with rejuvenation, there's the question of, okay, what's involved in rejuvenation? What should I be looking for? What should I be testing for? Before I test, I need to know what to test for. And if I just say rejuvenation, that's probably too broad. So I have 5 things that I look for in rejuvenation. And this is not to say that they should be your 5, but it is to say that you should think of what are your key standards for rejuvenation, so then you can test things effectively and even seek out claims to knowledge effectively. So here are my 5. 1 is restore physical energy. 2 is restore mental energy. 3 is create clarity and altitude. 4 is relieve stress. And 5 is facilitate motivation. So I'll go a little bit into each of those. But the key thing is for you to think of yours, although I think what I have here captures a lot of what anyone would want in rejuvenation, particularly for creative rejuvenation, which can be a little bit different from, say, how you might want to rejuvenate on a vacation. So restoring physical energy, part of being rejuvenated is I want to feel physically like new as much as possible. And sleep is obviously crucial to that. But during the day, I'm looking for what are activities that can make me feel physically like new so that I have the physical energy that's going to be tied to any creative work. And then that goes to restoring mental energy, which is very connected to physical energy, but not the exact same thing. How can it be so that my mind feels like it has just a ton to give? And to give credit to Seinfeld, he's got this amazing interview on a show called Success Without Stress, which is a show to promote transcendental meditation. And I don't mean to focus this at all on transcendental meditation, because I don't even think that it's universally something everyone should necessarily do, although I think it can be worth trying out. And I'll talk in a few minutes about a way to test it out without paying a bunch of money. But on that show, he talks a lot about his mindset for creation and rejuvenation. And one thing that he says, I don't remember it exactly, but he talks about how just tired is not a state that he accepts. When he's feeling tired, and in particular mentally tired, he feels like there's something off with that. That's not an okay state. And adopting that, I've just found immensely beneficial, because I have this clear standard in my mind of, okay, I want to have a high level of physical and mental energy. And then I'm aware of that. And if I start to feel depleted even a little bit, I become aware of the desirability of rejuvenation. And if I decide to push through, which is pretty rare, without doing something rejuvenating, then I know, okay, I'm starting to get into territory that I might not want to be in. So having this clear standard of physical and mental energy, and I want to be rejuvenated, is just incredibly helpful, and it's going to help us with finding and then testing different things that will rejuvenate us. The third is create clarity and altitude. So I like the term altitude a lot because it captures having a high-level perspective on life. And being able to look at my life as a whole is just valuable in so many ways. But with creation in particular, it's incredibly valuable because so much of effective creation is choosing the right work. And this applies in terms of what I'm doing during the day, during a given week, during a given month, during a given year. Whatever issues I have with, I wish I had worked a little harder that day, or I overworked, or I got distracted, when I look back over time, the dominant issue by far is, did I work on the right creative things? Did I work on the best creative things? And the more altitude I have in general, the more chance I have of figuring those things out and then catching them. You may notice that, for example, sometimes when you're sleeping, you rethink some decision. For example, I was thinking about a potential project yesterday to do and for a potential client, and I thought it through really well. And then when I woke up this morning, I had some thoughts, maybe even though I could do that and that would be lucrative, maybe that's not what I want to do. And regardless of what I decide, it's incredibly valuable to have that kind of altitude. So that's why altitude/clarity is another standard. Relieving stress. This will be more or less applicable to different people, I'm sure, but it's definitely something to think about. What activities can I do that certainly will tend to not add stress and that will make me feel more relaxed? Another thing I love from Seinfeld is he talks about in so many activities in life, the ideal state is energy plus relaxation. Energy plus relaxation. And I have an idea of doing a future episode of this show on relaxed productivity. So if that appeals to you, tell me at alex@alexepstein.com if that's an interesting subject, and maybe I'll cover it. But to preview it, a huge amount of relaxed productivity is making sure that we sufficiently rejuvenate. And then the last one, facilitate motivation, is very deliberate because, and again, take this as just this is my own system, so something else may work for you. But I don't usually think of rejuvenation as I need to get incredibly motivated. I need to psych myself up. There are definitely times to do that, but in particular during the day, what I want to make sure is that what I'm doing is either neutral or positive with regard to motivation. And certain things that we can do, particularly certain things that can distract us, can be very anti-motivation. And it's not necessarily that, this makes me actively demotivated to do work. But for example, I love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 15 and a half years now. If I go browse a bunch of Jiu-Jitsu sites during my day, then my mind is going to be focused on that. And that is not the kind of activity that is going to rejuvenate me. So big takeaway from the past 10 minutes or so is that we need to deliberately seek knowledge about rejuvenation. And to do that, we need to carefully define our own standards of rejuvenation. So mine at the moment are restore physical energy, restore mental energy, create clarity and altitude, relieve stress, facilitate motivation. So one thing to think about is, okay, what are yours? Do these work for you? Will something else work for you? And this is the kind of thing that can evolve, but it is really, really valuable in my experience to get these standards. So now once we have these standards, then we can much more easily validate, okay, what's going to be rejuvenating. And I want to focus on here a very specific inquiry, which is what's going to be rejuvenating for me. I see sometimes with issues like rejuvenation and other things where there can be a tendency to look too much toward certain kinds of empirical studies. So that you read an article in Psychology Today and it says, oh, people who do this are likely to feel 4% more rejuvenated. And that can definitely be valuable, particularly for giving me ideas about things to do. But to really figure out what works for me, the most efficient thing is usually just to test things directly on me. And sometimes people consider this subjective, but I think it's subjective in the right sense. I'm the subject. And ultimately, the reason I want abstract knowledge is to figure out what specifically will work for me. But sometimes the fastest way to get there is to just test things on me, particularly where I can test things. And it's pretty easy to tell what does what. And also it's pretty low risk. So you can't do this with everything. For example, with nutrition, I think you can do this a little bit. You can certainly identify how different foods over time make you feel, and that's important. But there are certain long-term variables that I have no idea if I can tell just based on how I feel. Although probably if it makes me feel really bad, it's not good long-term. But if I feel okay and energized, I don't know. I might be missing out on some big breakthrough. But with rejuvenation, a lot of what we're looking to experience is very identifiable in the moment. Do I feel rejuvenated? And therefore, this is an area where it's really valuable to use ourselves as the science lab and to try to look at carefully, okay, when I tweak this variable, what else happens? And you won't always be able to just change one thing at a time exactly, but over time, if you want to test, say, hey, what happens if I meditate the first 20 minutes of every day? Like if I do that for a month and then I do something else for a month, yeah, there can be what are called confounding variables. But you can get a pretty good sense of it, in part because you have not only the whole day, but you can have how you feel immediately after. So there's a lot you can do in terms of validating things for how they work on you. And what I want to encourage here is having that kind of experimental attitude and figuring out what actually works. And if we even just say that, there are specific things we can do. For example, one thing you can do for any given potential activity is you can ask, what percentage of the time does this make me feel rejuvenated? And you don't even need to do a new experiment, really. You could just inventory your memory and get pretty far. So what percentage of the time does this make me feel rejuvenated? And then what intensity do I experience? And you don't need to do it for rejuvenation as a whole. You can do it with the 5 standards I gave or your own standards. So how much does this restore my physical energy? How much does it restore my mental energy? And what you're going to find is that there are just certain things that work really, really well and certain things that don't. And the things that don't are often the things that we are taught to do as rest or relaxation. Part of the problem is we don't use the concept of rejuvenation. And so we do things that are very non-rejuvenating, usually, and yet it's considered, oh, I'm relaxing. So now this is all, I want to preface this all by saying there may be specific versions of these that work for you, which is why the main takeaway is test it. So, but watching TV, certainly binge watching TV, most of the time I find incredibly unrejuvenating. Social media, like consuming a lot of it, I don't find rejuvenating. And then certainly during the workday, that is not rejuvenating. And even though things like, it's important to think through not just does this in general work well, but what specific version of it works well or not. For example, socializing. It's really valuable to ask, does socializing during the day rejuvenate me or not? Usually for me, productively, it doesn't rejuvenate me much to socialize, although it might be to say hi to somebody. But having any kind of phone conversation, that can often be rejuvenating in a longer term sense, but it's not rejuvenating for a 20 or 30 minute break. Now, to figure this out, we need to just be as precise as possible about things. We want to figure out, okay, not just what general categories work for us, but what specific processes work and what specific processes work when. To give you a sense of how this applies to me, I'm going to give you 5 of my favorite rejuvenating activities, not to encourage you to do them necessarily, but one of them is super specific to me, but to give you a sense of what I mean by developing and testing and refining very specific potential rejuvenation processes. So one thing I love to do that has an incredibly high rate of success is I ride a skateboard called a one wheel. It's an electric skateboard. If you look up onewheel.com, unfortunately, they don't have a referral program because I think I've led to dozens of these things being sold, but check it out at onewheel.com. For a certain type of person, particularly if you enjoy snowboarding, it feels like snowboarding on land. It's just amazing. And I remember when I got it in 2016, I was talking to my sister on the phone, one of my sisters, and there are 3 of them. And I was really excited about it. She said, yeah, well, I wonder how it's going to be over time. And I can tell her now, it's just as good over time. It's amazing. And then I just noticed, okay, with one wheeling at a certain time of day, particularly in the mid to late evening, I live in Laguna Beach, so streets aren't too busy. Just when it's cool outside, one wheeling. And then specifically, I notice, one wheeling to music works particularly well. And then even one wheeling to music, I particularly like things that have certain kinds of choral sequences in them. Choral, not the stuff in the ocean, but CHORAL. And just it's that degree of specificity that can make or break something. Because actually, if I ride one wheel and I'm not listening to music, often what'll happen is I'll just think about work because I was just working. And sometimes I want a break from that because otherwise I'm not going to be fully rejuvenated. And so just customizing that exact experience is really, really important. Another big thing for me, fortunately I'm in Laguna Beach, is going to the ocean. I just find that 100% of the time I feel better after going into the ocean. And I notice that if I can go for 15 or 20 minutes, if I can make the time, then that's even a really big bonus. For me, once I start getting into the 15, 20-minute territory with things, it's a different level of rejuvenation. But even if it's 3 minutes, it's really, really good. So I have these little things in my rejuvenation arsenal, and with those, I generally do those each at least twice a day. And people who live in my neighborhood, because I work from home, if people see me regularly, they probably think I'm a bum because I'm just one-wheeling all the time. Not all the time, but multiple times a day. And then I'm just going in the ocean. And then, another thing that I do is, this is another example of specificity, is napping. Does napping work for you? And that's going to be different for different people. And I just want to encourage you to test it and really record what's happening and notice specific trends over time and keep refining things. Because for me, napping doesn't work that well, usually, but I have a specific type of nap that works really well, which, to go back to whom I'm thanking this show, is I call a Seinfeld nap. And basically during a Seinfeld nap, what I do is I don't watch Seinfeld, I just listen to Seinfeld. And I know Seinfeld really, really well because there are, 180 episodes, and I've probably seen them all at least 5 times or heard them all at least 5 times. And so what I find is that it engages me enough to take my mind off anything else, but I'm not captivated. I'm not wondering what's going to happen next. I don't have anticipation. And if I have anticipation, it's going to be hard for me to rest. And what I find is that for whatever reason, especially if I can lie out in the sun, I just begin an episode of Seinfeld, close my eyes, and then might fall asleep 7 minutes in. And then I always wake up at the closing credits, 9 out of 10 times. It's uncanny. And if I do it in that circumstance, it's just an amazing rejuvenation. So that is obviously not something that I'm suggesting everyone does, but that degree of obsessive focus with finding what's rejuvenating, I do recommend that everyone does. Taking a walk is another big one, and it's even okay, where is the best place to take a walk and when and for how long? And because we're testing on ourselves, we can really understand over time a lot of specific cause and effect. Like I walk, this is going to make me sound weird maybe, but I walk with headphones and I pretend that I'm having a phone conversation, but I'm actually talking to myself, because often with certain things, if I'm rejuvenating or even thinking creatively, I find it helpful to talk out loud. So you may find that weird or unhelpful. It might be good for you to be silent, but the thing is just the testing is having these clear standards and then testing so that you can have a really good cause and effect understanding of your own nature. And then the last one, so we had one wheeling, ocean, Seinfeld naps, taking a walk. The best one for me is still meditation, and I still do that transcendental meditation as I learned it. And the reason is because I haven't found anything else that I have the same guarantee that I'll get physical and mental energy from it. And in particular, over the years, I've realized that for me to do meditation first thing in the morning is an incredible driver of the success of my day if I do it, and I miss it a lot if I don't. And it's, at least for me, it's not that the meditation is some amazing experience, and sometimes I don't want to do it. Sometimes the biggest act of will in my day is just to sit in the chair and close my eyes and do the meditation, because I don't feel like doing it. It's not my favorite thing, but I just know from testing that, wow, if I do this, whatever else is going on, even if I think I have to jump right into work, that is money in the bank. And so whatever, if you can find something like that where it's just rejuvenation on demand and your mind can get really clear and your body can get really energized, that's what you want, because it's just going to make everything better. If you're having a good day, it's going to make everything better, and you'll just feel so relaxed when you're being productive, and you'll just know that you're going to have energy all the time, and you don't need caffeine. At least in my experience, I hardly ever consume caffeine anymore. I didn't even notice it. It wasn't deliberate. It's just, I was rejuvenating enough and I felt really good. And then on a bad day or a difficult day, that discipline of rejuvenation is probably even more important. And not just on a difficult day necessarily, or a bad day, but maybe just a taxing day where we use a ton of energy. Say when I do in-person performances, that takes a lot of energy out of me, I should say. And I find that what I've learned over time is that's really when I need to meditate or do rejuvenation, because if I just crash and sometimes I just feel like, maybe I'll eat junk food or maybe I'll watch something, that then it's a mess and then I'm zoned out for the rest of the day. So biggest takeaways today are, one, we need to really be looking for knowledge of rejuvenation. Two is that we need to identify clear standards of rejuvenation for ourselves. And then three is we need to test those above all on ourselves to figure out very, very specifically what actually rejuvenates us. And if we can do that, then it's going to be a huge asset to our own flourishing. So I usually like to end with an exercise, and today is no exception. In the Facebook group, or if you want to email me, but I prefer the Facebook group at facebook.com/Human Flourishing Project, share a process that rejuvenates you and include as much detail as possible, because often what the detail that makes something work for somebody else is going to help us a lot too. Sometimes the details, even though they're very specific, they might work for somebody else, or they'll at least give us a clue. A big point that's connected to this that I'll cover in another show maybe is just how much I like to learn from studying other people's very specific systems. I like to know exactly what are they doing. Say if they've got a really good, I was studying someone the other day and he seemed to have a really, really good system for accounting and banks, just that made it really easy to track. And I just wanted to know every little detail of how it worked, because then if I can test the exact system, then it's more likely that something will work the first time. And then once I have the exact system, then I can tweak it. But if I just try to modify it or have a vague idea, I'm probably going to be missing out on a lot of elements, and then it might not work for me at all. And then I'll be missing something that actually could have worked. So that's a bit of a tangent, but This is why I would really like to know, as specifically as you want to share, what is a process that rejuvenates you, and include the context, when you like to do it, why you like to do it. And I'm hoping that I learn something from that I can really use. And so my own rejuvenation arsenal, that's a little bit of a violent term for rejuvenation, but my own rejuvenation toolbox, let's say, will be better. All right. That is today's show. I hope you enjoyed the discussion of rejuvenation. As always, if you have any questions or comments, you can email me at alex@alexepstein.com. Most of the discussion for the show takes place on the Facebook page, so facebook.com/Human Flourishing Project. And to get weekly emails every Friday when new episodes come out, make sure you're subscribed at humanflourishingproject.com. All right. I look forward to your feedback. I look forward to your processes, and I will talk to you next week. Until then, I'm Alex Epstein, and this has been the Human Flourishing Project.